Hey guys, how you going? Welcome to the Positive Experience podcast, where we look at the good, the bad and the ugly in living your best life. Today's segment is called In the Trenches, where we look behind the scenes at what's happening in the clinic. Hey guys, and welcome everyone to our December episode of our roundtable of our podcast, and we make it a little transition with our trenches, where each month we review what that theme of the month was. So for November, it was men's health. This month, the month of December, we're reviewing kids' health. Okay, so each of us will just share a few little things about what we're seeing and, just see where the conversation takes us. So thanks for tuning in. Where I'd like to begin with kids' health, what does that actually mean? I think there's different types of young people that come to see physios. The youngest person that I've treated is a 6-month-old baby who came in with a neck torticollis problem, where basically the neck was just quite stuck and there wasn't any manual techniques I was applying. It was just trying to help mum and dad understand, in the environment, just trying to help baby look the other side. And, that was mostly when I was a student, so that's the youngest person that I've treated. And the oldest person is probably 96 that I've managed. So it'd be interesting to see, how young a few of the other boys here on our round table have found. But before I pass the mic on, one of the big things I find in dealing with young athletes or young people is expectations. And there's an expectation of the kid to just enjoy himself, herself running around the playground. But then there's also expectations of parents, especially if the young person is a pretty good athlete. I think sometimes it can be a challenge just to allow things to unfold, So just on that, I'd like to see what the others have found in the trenches too when you're helping young people out. What are your thoughts, Mike?
Yeah, so I guess sometimes it's, perhaps dealing with the parents and seeing their kids do extremely well on the field or on the court, and then them getting really pushed into the sport or pushed to become better, even though they might be having a few niggles. That might be an issue early on during their sport. So it's definitely something that I've seen, even though just working over this year, especially in Kyneton being a sporting area. There's a lot of people really into the footy, into their soccer, that it's quite a common thing to see. And I think sometimes it's just about educating the parents as to what is normal, what is expected, what is the child, raising a lot of those red flags, or perhaps it's just them, whining and not actually wanting to play the sport itself. But yeah, definitely something that's common.
Yeah, perfect. And I think we may have all heard the term growing pains, and what that actually means. But, what have you seen, Avi, and what's growing pains mean to you?
I've seen, I agree with Mike and how a lot of them get pushed. The biggest thing for me is the load and overtraining. I noticed that with a lot of them coming in with niggles. You ask them how much you're training, because when you think about it, us adults at lunchtime, we don't really go play around with our fellow colleagues. We're actually having a lunchtime, whereas the kids at school time are going playing soccer or cricket or whatever during lunchtime, and they have their own training outside. And they're usually doing that like 5 to 7 days a week, pretty much every day, because you can tolerate a little bit of play, but the more intensity-based stuff, you need a little bit rest like adults. As we get older, we dive more into it, but the kids need to be looking at that as well, and that needs to come from the parents' perspective. So that's my view on what we discussed a little bit earlier. And growing pains, there is a couple of things with growing as you're growing, as you're getting older. Sometimes the muscles or the tendons don't grow as fast as you can, or they overshoot compared to your bones, and that can cause a little bit of issues. And with that kind of things, you just got to be a little bit careful. I think Lecky will touch on a little bit more about those from his blog post on Osgood Shoulders.
Yeah, so just check my blog post and you'll see that one of the key things I generally ask, and you may just ask yourself this if you're a parent watching this back, how many days a week is my child resting from sport? So from training and actually playing in season. So I ask this question sometimes within the assessment, when someone's coming to catch up with me. And often there's about probably 3 days that they're busy, and then the other 4 days they're pretty relaxed and don't have much sport on, and that's great. One of the worst scenarios, not worst, one of the most interesting scenarios that I'd heard was that there's this one child who played 3 different sports, had something on every day of the week. And on 2 of those days, they had a morning session as well. So morning and an afternoon session. So basically, this young athlete was just getting overcooked, overloaded, which is one of the main driving factors for anybody, but particularly for developing young people, because their bones are still very cartilaginous, so it's pretty soft still. And if you've got these anchoring muscles that anchor into those bones, in my piece, I wrote about Osgood-Schlatter's, and it's quite common that you can have this bulging bit of bone out to where your patellar tendon attaches to the front of your knee. And that's that kind of unsightly bulge, that lump that you see. So it's not like pathological, like that in itself isn't a problem. It's just more of a sign of what we see, that maybe there's more to the story. And, in my own story, I was a pretty fast young guy, and I started developing Osgood-Schlatter's because I too was pretty busy growing up. So I think when you suffered a few things yourself, you have more context on giving advice, So I think just, myself being a parent, I think you just want to be a bit more aware that I wouldn't expect me, a 35-year-old, to be pushing that level of busyness every day of the week without rest. I'd be rusty. So I think it's just something to be mindful of there, guys. So I think in other conditions, so in Con, he wrote about Seaver's ankle, which is a growing pain for ankles. And I think it's interesting with Avi, what your thoughts were with your blog piece. What were the main points in what you wrote, mate?
So my blog piece was it's going to be uploaded soon. So it was on lifting. What age should kids start lifting? So I talk about some myths that a lot of people relate to and what they find and why it can stunt growth and etc. But all this blog post really focuses on what the actual research states. And the main take-home point is the research. There's no evidence behind that lifting will stunt people's growth, but at the same time, you got to be wise in how you actually do the lifting techniques. So it all comes down to learning the technique first and earning the right before you go up, instead of just lifting heavy weights from the start. So once you master the movement patterns, it makes a big difference, and it translates to them on the sporting fields.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, my involvement with sporting groups with rugby and lacrosse and soccer is they generally start, they subscribe to the old method of, you shouldn't be lifting, you shouldn't be doing things until you allow your body to develop, which is a bit of a gray area, when is the right time? But, with what Avi's shining to in what he's pointing to in his blog post is that if you learn certain movement patterns and potentially you start with body weight training, absolutely nothing wrong with that. And if you've got the right foundation for moving appropriately, and then you can start to, use a broomstick, then you can start to use maybe a barbell, even though you may be 14 and growing, you've got the right movement patterns that won't overload joints. So you won't reduce the chance of you developing something like an Osgood-Schlatter's or having hip problems or back pain. So I think we should be thinking about embracing the idea of really good movement patterns and preparing young athletes for success in sport. So regardless of contact sport, or if you're a swimmer or whatever, I think we all understand that optimizing the way we move will help you perform better. What are your thoughts on that, Mike? And what have you seen in the clinic?
Yeah, I haven't met any young weightlifters or anyone that's keen to begin quite early. There's just a lot that are really into their cardiovascular health, so looking into the running and the cycling itself. I had a question for Avi though. When it comes to the myth itself, is there any news as to how that came about? Like, who spread that, or has there been any instances where somebody found that it stunted their growth? Is that something you came across at all?
I can't remember the dates. I think it was early 1900s, so it was in Japan. They did a study of young kids doing heavy manual labor, and then because they were rounding all day, they were doing all like really poor movement pattern based stuff. That's where they sort of got that myth from, that it stunts growth, because it did affect their growth a little bit, just because their movement patterns were really bad and they were constantly hunched over 24/7, especially when they're doing heavy manual work. But there's no new research stating that it stunts growth by any chance. So like leading professors around even America, they're actually starting strength training very early for all sports.
Yeah, so for me, that sounds like it's just something that could happen at any age. If you're using poor lifting technique, whether you're 16, whether you're 35, you're always going to be at risk for injury. So it's interesting that they made a correlation straight away just from that experience. Yeah. They could have maybe looked at, different groups, maybe older groups, and saw if it was a common trend, just lifting poorly with a rounded back with heavy loads. Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, awesome. So I think just to finish off my point earlier, rugby, what I've come to learn is that they are lifting in the rugby circles that I'm familiar with. They are lifting in the gym now, but they've started with some good movement pattern work. So, for example, the Melbourne Storm, Melbourne Rebels here in Melbourne, they train out of a facility at Amy Park, and having some friends there that operate in that gym called Ace Performance. When I was there and I was just watching and going through some of their programming, it was just interesting to see how young some of these athletes were. So there was a hurdler. She was probably 14, quite long, athletic build, but she was going through like hopping. She was drilling her hip and knee mechanics when she's trying to clear a hurdle. And then she went over and started doing some deadlifts. And then, she came back and she drilled her that sort of skipping approach. And then sort of she ran off. And then there was a high level AFL referee, and she's a young girl still too. And she was and her form looked fantastic, and it was being watched closely by professionals, helping them along in analysis of their movement pattern and whether they're ready to titrate up or down the load, how busy they are. So, in our chat today, we're just thinking about what's appropriate in terms of, lifting and movement. We're also thinking about load. So if you're doing too much, and it may be sort of not heavy, but a heap of it, that repetitive nature for a developing body may be an equation setting you up for failure rather than success. So I think for any parent there that's unsure, just having some great quality advice to begin with is a great place to start, rather than, prevention is better than a cure. So if you're unsure, it's better just get in front of problems and just ask the question. And then that way you've got better foundations to make better decisions. So I think, this isn't like trying to throw rocks at parents. I know, you're just trying your best, but I think you've got to be mindful that, really the kids are looking up to us to help them along in their own little journey. So for our roundtable today, guys, thank you very much for tuning in on our roundtable. This is the last one for 2021. And what we thought was for 2020, and as we're coming around the bend towards the home stretch, we thought we'd share a little bit of a review of 2020, and then maybe look ahead to cast one goal, each of us, for 2021. So I'll give the boys a chance to think about what their goals are. So I think for me, in 2020, if I was to review, where we are and how things have been, I think for me, I'm just coming from a really big place of gratefulness. I know in Victoria here, we've come out the other end of really heavy lockdowns, and at the peak of that, there was only a time and place where you could get out of your house for 1 hour. So, we quickly forget about that. But being outside, grateful for that. Being able to switch on the television, watch live sport, grateful, sitting in a cafe. So I'll carry that with me into 2021. But aside from that, I'm really big on gymnastics training at home. So I'm really working towards my muscle up using gymnastics rings. So I've been chipping away 3 years along, and I'm almost there doing a really good, strict muscle up. So check me out on Instagram if you're interested. I pop in some stories every so often on how my progress is, but it's pretty ugly, so you're not missing out on much. That's my goals for 2021. Mike, what are yours, big fella?
Yeah, I think you brought an interesting point up with, COVID and everything being locked down. I think the first thing that came to mind for me is, just investing in close relationships over the next year. Just seeing how important it was to keep that afloat during 2020 just makes me realize how important it is to just keep it going even during normal conditions. And on the more physical side, like you, just pushing on to my running, trying to get that 5K down to the 4-minute mark would be a big goal for me as well. So currently sitting at the 4:46 from my last one. Be nice to get it down, but yeah, it's going to be a big effort to get it there.
Nice, mate. You're getting quick.
All right. I'm similar to you guys. Very grateful for being out of lockdown. Just going to enjoy every moment, I suppose, and enjoy going out for dinner, cafes, and just enjoying the food with friends and family. And then my physical goal is not the running side, not very cardio bunny at the moment. It's more, I'm going for more the aesthetic base. So just trying to put on a little bit more muscle and see what might even compete a couple of years down the track. We'll see where we are.
Awesome. All right, guys, there are our goals and 2020 review, goals for 2021. What your goals are, whatever they may be, we wish you wealth and health and all the good stuff in this holiday season. And we look forward to catching up with you in 2021. Stay happy and healthy out there, guys. Making healthy simple.